Okay, guys, I am here today with Lucas Owen of Ergogenic Health, all the way coming to us from Australia. And I just want to talk to him today about all the different things we can do for as far as biohacking and optimizing our performance. Most of you guys are natural. I think about 85% of the viewers. So you're always looking for that edge, what you can do naturally to kind of take things, peak things and get stronger and get bigger and all that sort of stuff. So I thought we'd have Lucas on. And I've been seeing a lot of your videos lately, obviously the icing protocols. So getting right into it, one of the main things you talked about extensively and you kind of introduced this was the whole idea of icing your testicles, icing your balls. And it sounds crazy. Like if someone's never heard that, they're like, that's ridiculous, that's crazy. But there is a lot of research and science behind it from what I've seen, where this has legitimate purposes for raising natural testosterone levels. So I kind of wanted to ask you about that. You just did a video on it. How did you kind of discover this and how did you get into it?
Yeah, man. Well, yeah, I've always been really interested in ways to optimize testosterone naturally. I quickly realized that, by optimizing testosterone and DHT and estrogen, all these hormones that, is going to see some pretty positive effects in terms of, performance, motivation, drive, building muscle, things like that. But the whole icing protocol came about when I was actually, I was diving deep in the bro science forums back in the day, where I was looking at different methods and ways that men were increasing fertility. So at first I was interested in like, how can men improve fertility? Because at the time I was studying naturopathy. So, I was really interested in men's fertility. And then I came across like a bodybuilding thread where they were saying that a range of like Russian and Chinese powerlifters used to ice their balls before they'd try and break a personal best. And then I delved deeper into the science, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to give this a crack. I'm going to start icing my balls. And I remember it was about 3 years ago now. And I remember within the first week of doing that, I remember just waking up with more morning wood. I remember having a little bit more energy than usual. I remember having higher sex drive. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to do some blood tests. So I, organized getting a baseline blood test of total testosterone and free testosterone and all the other hormones as well, SHBG, DHT, thyroid. I did the whole suite of tests. And my testosterone was already sitting at around, I think it was around 800 nanograms per deciliter, like just naturally. But then when I started icing, so I did it for about 12 weeks or so. And the second time, I also implemented a bunch of other things. There were many other factors that I implemented, like some other supplements and stuff. But I did manage to get it to 988 nanograms per deciliter naturally. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty ridiculous number because right now I think I'm sitting around 350-ish. And obviously, I wonder how much this would work because someone like me who'd been on anabolic steroids for 9 years, it's kind of a whole different ballgame coming off. It's been 27 months. I still have the low testosterone, but the LH and FSH signaling is extremely high. So would that still be something I could apply that you think would have merit, or do you think the testicular damage would kind of outweigh that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Like when we look at some of the anabolic androgenic steroids, whether or not they're actually working like localized in the testes or upstream in the brain. So this is where it comes back to like, is the problem, is the deficit occurring due to improper signaling from the brain to the testes? So that whole GnRH cascade axis. If it is a structural or a functional issue with the testes, for example, if there's some degree of like inflammation or poor circulation to the testes, I think icing definitely will be beneficial, like as a part of a PCT. I think it's still highly beneficial. I mean, I see a number of guys, I've worked with a number of guys who are looking at improving fertility. And there was one guy that I worked with after like 10 weeks or so, he like tripled his sperm count just from icing 10 to 15 minutes a day.
That's pretty remarkable. So is the protocol, I think you said it was like 3 times a day, 15 minutes at a time. And I assume like I don't want people to get the wrong idea as far as you're not just putting ice right on them. You want some degree of separation as far as clothing or some sort. Is that true?
Yeah. So I get a number of guys like also message me about like whether or not they're. So I get some guys message me about the weirdest ways that they can ice their balls. Like I don't even know how they think of methods like this. I had one guy say he puts ice cubes in a frying pan and he puts his balls in the frying pan. It's just crazy.
Yes, this can get into some pretty strange territory, but I mean, it doesn't have to be. It's a legitimate practice, and it makes sense as far as the blood flow effects. I know you've touched on that. That's part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, so as far as the actual application, so like the proper way to actually do the protocol, like is to apply the ice pack up against your underwear. So not directly to the scrotal skin. It has to be up against the underwear, cooling that area down for about 10 to 15 minutes or so. And repeating that like up to 3 times a day. I mean, like the best times to do it would be, and this is what I've found is before going to the gym, obviously, as like, core body temperature elevates when you work out, anytime the testes are just 2 degrees too warm or outside their optimal range, like that by itself can completely arrest spermatogenesis. So this is why the testes are actually found outside the male body. And so like 10 to 15 minutes, 3 times a day. As far as the actual mechanism of action, so like actually wondering how icing the balls actually facilitates better fertility and testosterone production. I have theories. So the first one is the extreme vasoconstriction followed by a rebound vasodilation, which brings new and fresh oxygen and nutrients to the testes, and they need a rich blood supply to function optimally. And then I also think that circulation component, like the blood flow deficit may also be contributing there. And then also, I don't know if there's any research in this area, but like we're starting to learn about the effects of cold exposure on mitochondrial biogenesis. Maybe it's playing a role there in some way as well.
Yeah, that makes sense because one of the things I was thinking about was most of my progress as far as strength training in the gym, most of the strength gains that I've made over the course of the last 2 years since I came off anabolic steroids and testosterone have been in the winter months, which I find really interesting because this would tie into the idea and the theory that heat is destructive as far as testosterone levels. It's one of those things I put together and started to realize, wow, most of my progress has been in the cold winter months.
This is a really critical point, and again, for like even just natural athletes, if they're trying to optimize their testosterone, to avoid sauna usage like 3 to 4 times a week. For example, we know that sauna, beyond the fact that it can heat up the testes, so that by itself is going to lower testosterone and fertility. And then second to that is if they're going to be used. Oh, the other component is the hormonal adaptation from heat exposure. There is some research suggesting that sauna use can increase prolactin. And prolactin, of course, you'd know all about that, is the hormone that we want to be like suppressing because prolactin has a negative effect on testosterone production as well.
Okay, and then would you say, like a lot of people would push back and say the sauna is really good from a health standpoint, from a cardiovascular standpoint. Would you say that the cons as far as what it would do to your testosterone levels would outweigh the benefits? And there's better ways.
In this situation, what I would do is like I just encourage men to pack an ice pack in the sauna so that the testes don't get too warm. That's just a practical application, is just to make sure they're actually bringing an ice pack into the sauna and using it in there.
Now, what do you think are the main hacks that you've found to raise natural testosterone production beyond the icing protocol? Supplements, obviously, the really popular ones nowadays are like Tongkat Ali, Fedoja agressus. Those are the main two that have kind of come mainstream. Everyone's talking about. I'm actually currently running both of them along with creatine, so it's a little tough to say what's doing what. But I'm going to get my lab work checked, get the test results back, and see what the see how they raise them. But would you say those are kind of the main two right now, or are there even better alternatives out there as far as raising natural testosterone?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I was really hyper analytical when it came to like what are the best herbs and supplements to actually facilitate, high levels of testosterone. I do think Tonkat Ali and Fedosia are both pretty effective and potent ways to actually stimulate the testes and testosterone production. There is another herb from traditional Chinese medicine. So I was like, at one stage, I was like, I want to talk to the best of the best in Chinese medicine, and I want to ask them what is the most potent herb that they know about for men's hormonal health. And they pointed me towards a herb called Cistanche, 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 also known as Rukong Rong. And I was interested in learning more about it, and so I dived deep on PubMed. There was one article where the study was titled Cistanche, one of the best traditional gifts of modern medicine, or something like that. And I looked into the mechanism of action, and I could see what it was doing in terms of upregulating a lot of the enzymes that are responsible for converting cholesterol into pregnenolone, and then from pregnenolone downstream into all the other hormones.
So what exactly does pregnenolone do in the human body?
So pregnenolone is considered the mother of all hormones because it's the first step in which cholesterol gets converted into pregnenolone. And then from pregnenolone, it can go downstream into progesterone, DHEA, and all the other hormones.
So that would be like a natural precursor you'd need to testosterone production even?
Yeah, so sometimes we even see, as part of a PCT stack, even in your case, Pete, is like you could consider running like pregnenolone with Cistanche because you're going to get that double up effect. 20 milligrams of pregnenolone that will actually help to facilitate the entire cascade.
Okay, see, I don't know much about that because I've heard of pregnenolone, but I really don't know what it does. So that's interesting. Now, like I eventually want to segue. I think I have another 10 months before I can do it into drug tested lifting, which you have to be 3 years drug free. So I don't know if pregnenolone would be allowed. My guess is a lot of that stuff that's actually the replica of the hormone is banned usually. So a lot of those are not an option, but the Cistanche, am I saying it right?
Yeah,
That would
yeah,
be possibly an option to kind of facilitate all that.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I'd say also like in combination, if you're looking at like some other like natty sups, for example, or some other ways that will not get you busted in a drug test, megadosing taurine at about 5 to 7 grams a day can actually help to reverse testicular damage following steroid use. So it can actually help to restore testicular architecture and function as well.
Wow, okay. I had no idea about any of this. So this is really interesting. I'll have to go back and take notes on this because this is right up my alley. I'm not it's weird with me. In my case, this is a very special case. I haven't seen it much before. There's not a lot of examples out there. But the LH is like 9 and the FSH is like or no, the LH is 9.9 or something that and the FSH is 9. So the
Wow.
signaling is extremely high, but the actual total testosterone level is in the 300 range, which is just baffling to me. The free testosterone is 9.5 on a scale from about 10 to 30. So that the
Mm.
testosterone production isn't there, but the signaling is, which makes me wonder if, these two methods you talked about with the Cistanche and the taurine would do the trick as far as possibly, turning that back on. That's something I'll have to look into.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, having known that now, Pete, I'm thinking like, is there, testicular like damage or some of the actual testicular architecture and structure and function, in your case, knowing the fact that, you know, you're getting a lot of signaling from the top down, but the actually testes are not responding well, then yeah, definitely taurine, cystanch.
Okay.
I'd even say certain like mitochondrial enhancers. So obviously L-carnitine is going to be beneficial in your case as well, for, you know, just, you know, supporting mitochondrial function in the testes. And then you could also look into some other herbs as well. The other herb that I'm really interested in, and what I've recently discovered, is a herb that actually outperformed testosterone itself, in terms of increasing testosterone. And that was interesting because it actually increased testosterone and kept levels elevated for up to 1 month after stopping use. And that herb there is called Anacyclus pyrethrum, which I recently did a video on that. I think it was like 2 months ago. But I think that one there we'll start to see popping up in a lot of natural testosterone boosting formulas.
Do you think some of these herbs that you've listed, are they more effective than Tonka and Fedosia agrestis? Because I'm almost wondering why have those two supplements gotten all the hype lately? Like they've exploded in popularity in the last 6 to 8 months, and I haven't heard of any of these others. So I'm just interested, what kind of made those come to the forefront?
Well, I mean, it's very obvious to figure that out as far as like why Fedosia and Tonka have popped. You know, it's simply because Dr. Andrew Huberman, you know, featuring on Joe Rogan's podcast, which, by the way, Andrew Huberman's an amazing source of information. I do look up to him in many ways. I think it's, you know, him talking about two of these herbs. You know, the video goes viral, then all of a sudden everyone's looking for Tonka and Fedosia, which, by the way, at least he's talking about two herbs that I do deem as, you know, beneficial. Luckily, he's not talking about, for example, maca powder. You know, maca powder has like no research on testosterone production. Like it has no good effect on that.
What do you think about Tribulus? That was the old natural testosterone booster that had all the hype, I'd say 10 to 15 years ago. If you looked at any natural testosterone booster at like a GNC, it was always Tribulus. That was the main ingredient, and that was what got all the hype. But then it sounds like now the research almost hasn't backed that up to where it's kind of disappeared off into the sunset.
Yeah, you're spot on, man. Like, I mean, initially there was some pretty interesting research around tribulus and fertility, but unfortunately, some of the modern research now has just like not been too impressive. I think there was one study in athletes, and this could be for guys that have been like destroyed by finasteride or hair loss drugs. I do think tribulus can actually help to re-kickstart DHT production. I've seen that in blood tests with guys that have been using tribulus, that their DHT levels have actually increased. And that doesn't really surprise me at all.
Yeah. And then what about, I got one more that kind of came to mind that has a little popularity behind it now, like Orchic PMG or bull testicles. I've heard that. I've heard certain people just from anecdotal evidence swear by it, but I haven't actually seen the research or anything. Do you think that has any merit?
Well, this comes back to the old philosophy of medicine, like cures like, which is like, you know, sort of based around it's the doctrine of, it's almost like the doctrine of signatures, but it's like, I do think some of the nutrients that would be present in, and even some of there's probably unknown peptides found within orchic glandular extract, for example, that modern medicine we haven't even discovered yet. So it wouldn't surprise me if it does contain like constituents or maybe like peptides, that can help to maybe, I don't know, support DHEA production, or maybe facilitate the conversion of, you know, cholesterol to, or upregulate 3-beta HSD. Subjectively, I have used orchic glandular in the past. I don't know if the brand that I used was very good. I didn't really notice much. Compared to like some of the other herbs that I've used in the past.
Well, so if I had to ask you then, if you were to give your top 3 to 5 uh, testosterone boosting supplements, what would you say? That might be kind of hard to narrow down, but obviously, we know icing will help. I don't know to what degree that would raise testosterone. What would you say as far
Oh,
as
the icing bites. Yeah, by itself, ice. If a guy just started icing by like, and he was at a, let's say, it was like sitting at around like maybe 500 nanograms per deciliter, and he starts icing 2 to 3 times a day, and his existing lifestyle is, he's subjected to like, hot environments, and he just starts icing. It wouldn't surprise me if he's able to boost that by 100 nanograms, 100 to 150 nanograms per deciliter. Um,
yeah.
just by itself. Yeah.
So that could potentially mitigate some of that loss we see in the summer months where we're constantly in a hot environment and your testosterone may possibly dip. That's really interesting because I never put that together, the connection of warm weather with lower testosterone, whereas when the colder months, testosterone generally is a little higher and I'm stronger. But going back to the question, like if it may be hard to pinpoint, nail down, a few specific ones, but if you had to go with like a top 3 or 5 as far as the natural testosterone boosting supplements, what would you pick?
Yeah. So number one would be Cistanch, Cistanch extract. Number two, I would actually put Tonkat Ali up there just because the research is so strong. Number three would be that Anacyclus pyrethrum. That's like the Ayurvedic herb that I think has some really impressive research. Obviously, that one there is more so the rodent studies. I don't think there's any actual human studies on that particular herb, but based upon what guys have said about it, and also I know it's a weaker form of evidence, but what guys have said about it, the fertility aspect, and also the traditional usage of the herb, like it's already impressed me enough. Um, and then number four, I'd say pine pollen extract, which is what I consider the male equivalent of phytoestrogens. Like, you know how we hear about soy being estrogenic, which I fully agree with. You know, soy is estrogenic and problematic for men in general. The equal and opposite is pine pollen, which is nature's richest source of phytoandrogens. So there's actually phytoandrogens present in pine pollen.
Okay, and then do you have
Um,
a fifth, or would you call it there? Those are the most important.
and then I would throw in, I mean, it's not a herb, but I'd say taurine deserves a spot. It really does because, and we're talking like doses that are much higher than what you see in like various supplements. Usually they put doses around 500 milligrams to about 1,000 milligrams, but I'd say you need like 5 to 7 grams of taurine to really have a positive effect on testosterone production.
Would that be split up throughout the day, I assume, or would that just be all at once, like 5 grams?
I personally, because I know about all the other effects of taurine, I actually like to split the dosage because it has a hypoglycemic effect by itself. Take a big dose like that, and check your blood sugar. Pretty sure, like you'll see a decline in your blood sugar levels.
Wow. So would this be something I would do for a period of a few weeks, or would this be something you would do indefinitely with the taurine?
It's The taurine is a product is a supplement that I say it should be chronic. Like I'm talking
Wow.
months. Yeah, months. Just let it saturate in the body.
Is that partially for the heart health effects of it as well, or is that just from a testosterone standpoint?
Um, yeah, exactly, man. Like way beyond just the testosterone aspect. So the heart health, the electrolyte balancing effects, so acting as an osmolyte, or the buffering of lactic acid, so delaying fatigue, improving fatty acid oxidation, improving brain function is by far the most obvious one. In fact, that's the reason why I first got interested in taurine, was the fact that it can increase BDNF, increasing GABA, blocking glutamate, supporting dopamine synthesis, active, very highly neuroprotective. I'm pretty sure my video on YouTube, if you search like taurine benefits, I'm pretty sure my video ranks #1 now. I did like a massive breakdown on taurine.
Wow, see, I feel like we're getting a gold mine of information because a lot of this stuff, I'm being honest, it has not been covered by anyone else. I don't see this stuff anywhere else, um, as far as some of these supplements and the exact breakdown of why they're effective. Now, people, they give me a hard time if I didn't ask you. So, what would we talk as far as dosing for each of these supplements? So, we kind of went through five of them, starting with Sustench. What would the dose be of all these different testosterone boosters?
So the Cistanch, the one that I like to use, is like it's a water alcohol extract. So it needs to be, we're using a half a teaspoon. So it's like in a powder form. You'll see
Yeah.
a range of different Cistanch products on the market. Some of them are already encapsulated, but the one that I like to use is, it's Lost Empire Herbs. So I've got it linked on my website. It's like half a teaspoon in warm water in the morning. I like to do that in the morning. And that one there, usually about 8 weeks on and then 2 weeks off. That's like the general practice that I usually recommend. For the second ingredient, so Tonkat Ali, which usually I like to use a 100-to-1 extract or potency, and anywhere from 100 milligrams to 200 milligrams, that usually works pretty well. The third ingredient, which was the anacyclus pyrethrum, that one there, we're looking at about a quarter of a teaspoon of the actual extract powder. Again, that can be like in warm water. With the pine pollen tincture, anywhere from 15 to 20 drops sublingually. So underneath the tongue, this is an alcohol extraction. Sublingually under the tongue, 15 to 20 drops, leaving it there for a little bit and then swallowing. And then finally was the taurine, which we discussed, 5 to 7 grams split up into different doses, like into 2 gram, 1.5, 2 gram doses.
And yeah, that's really helpful. And what I can do, guys, is I will link from Lucas's website the links to these supplements, and then I'll put the doses next to them as far as what you recommend. So that'll make it a lot more simplistic as far as cutting through and, spelling things out, remembering the names and all that. So that's a gold mine of information because a lot of those haven't been talked about outside the traditional like Tonkat Ali and stuff. Now,
Yeah.
I have to ask you about this creatine that you've been talking about. So there's some form of creatine. I'm looking at it kind of here. That's like this new wave of creatine that's presumably a lot more effective than traditional creatine monohydrate. Could you tell us a little bit about this, what it is, where this came from, and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to like sports supplements, I have been obsessed with like the basics: creatine, beta-alanine, citrulline, taurine, glycine, arginine. And we do know that creatine monohydrate is the gold standard creatine on the market. Everyone's talking about creatine monohydrate being the best, most studied form, and that is true. Now, this new form of creatine called creatine is a combination of creatine monohydrate combined with its precursor, GAA. So they've just combined both molecules together. Guanidinoacetic acid is GAA, and they've combined it with creatine monohydrate. And this combination yields a much better response in terms of bioavailability. The really, really interesting component is that it's 8.5 times more effective than creatine monohydrate. And if we sort of look at the mechanism of action, it's because this form of creatine, this creatine, usually creatine monohydrate has only one way to enter the cell, but this new form of creatine has 4 ways to enter the cell. It can do it by the creatine transporter 1, passive diffusion, the taurine receptors, and also the GABA receptors. So we're seeing better uptake and utilization by the body. And also the fact that GAA was initially researched as far as its benefits in terms of increasing creatine levels in the brain. Now, this is, again, another really exciting aspect. Yes, we're seeing lots of new research coming out about the benefits of creatine monohydrate for as neuroprotective, facilitating better memory performance, and improving cognition in general. But this new form of creatine, this creatine, results in 3.9 times more creatine in the gray matter of the brain and 1.9 times more creatine in the white matter of the brain. So it's a highly potent nootropic as well.
So would the benefit to that just be greater mental clarity, concentration, possibly, obviously this is a very inconclusive statement, but possibly helping with long-term like dementia or something down the line? I don't know. Isn't that the whole idea, kind
Yeah,
of nootropics and such?
yeah, exactly. I mean, we're seeing more and more research now, demonstrating the beneficial effects of higher levels of creatine in the brain. One of the reasons why, in my opinion, I think vegans and vegetarians are at higher risk of neurological issues because they have insufficient levels of creatine. But as far as the subjective effects, yeah, improving memory performance, perception, learning, attention, decision making, dream recall. That's probably the most noticeable effect that I noticed within the first week of dosing. Was that I was waking up remembering I was getting extremely vivid dreams, like very, very vivid dreams. I could remember them like inside out.
Is the dosing the same as creatine monohydrate as far as 5 grams being the traditional recommended dose?
So that's a really good question. So this form of creatine, it's a much lower dosage. So it's actually 1.8 grams roughly per sachet. So it actually, the reason why they manufacture this form of creatine in a sachet versus as like a bulk powder is because not many people, not many athletes realize this, but creatine monohydrate, when it's packed in a bulk packaging, it's very hygroscopic, and so what happens is over time, if water molecules actually somehow make its way, or moisture in the air makes its way into the actual pack, it can actually reduce the quality and the effectiveness of your creatine supplement. This could even explain why some guys they're like non-responders to creatine. It could be because they're just not storing their creatine correctly. They're leaving the packet like slightly opened, and moisture and air have made its way in.
Yeah, creatine is pretty remarkable to me. It's one of those things where being off cycle now, off all that kind of all the good stuff, anabolic steroids and such, I actually make really noticeable progress in terms of strength and size on it. I'll add in 5 grams, and generally within a week, I can feel noticeably more strength. My bench shoots up, my deadlift, everything. So it's one of those things where it's proven and I really feel it. It's remarkable how much of a difference it makes. It just shoots all my lifts way up. Now,
Yeah.
one thing I want to touch on too is some of these novel sleep enhancing compounds. What would you say those would be? What's going to help our sleep the most?
Yeah, I want to talk about a particular seaweed that I was really impressed with the research coming out of Japan. In fact, they've spent over $33 million researching this actual seaweed. But lots of Western society, like US and Australia, not many people know about this particular seaweed. It's called Eclonia cava, not to be confused with the Fijian herb kava. It's called Eclonia cava. It's a brown algae. So the initial research that I was looking at was actually because Eclonia cava was found in all these like nitric oxide boosting supplements, because it's a really potent way to upregulate endothelial nitric oxide synthase, so increasing vasodilation, circulation. Probably one of the most potent ways to actually improve cardiovascular function is by using this seaweed. But then I was looking into some of the constituents found within Eclonia cava. They're called the fluorotannins. And these can actually they're known as positive allosteric modulators of the GABA A receptors. So basically, what that means is that it's making the GABA receptors in the brain more responsive to the body's own GABA. So what that means is that it will elicit an anti-anxiety effect. It will help to lower cortisol, and it also helps to increase alpha waves in the brain, which is similar to L-theanine, which is from green tea. Eclonia cava does share that same benefit there. So as far as sleep wise, and this is what I've seen a number of guys report following usage, and I noticed this within the first couple of weeks of using it, was that Eclonia cava gives you that sort of sleep where you wake up in the morning and you feel like you can't fall back asleep because you feel like you just had such a really refreshing sleep.
I wonder if that would be good for someone especially with sleep apnea. Sleep apnea, obviously, a lot of people use a CPAP. I have had over the course of the last decade, especially when I was bigger, pretty bad sleep apnea. I don't think it's as bad now. I don't necessarily have like a great way to measure that. My wife just says I don't snore anymore, whereas I used to snore really bad. But I wonder if this would be a way to perhaps lessen that to some degree, or cancel some of that out as far as the effectiveness of the quality of your sleep. Or if you're someone who doesn't sleep a whole lot, maybe this would be a way to maximize the quality of it to where maybe it's more REM sleep. Is that kind of what it does as far as stimulate more REM sleep?
Yeah, I think part of its mechanism, I mean, definitely, yeah, assisting with the REM component, like the REM aspect of sleep. It's also a natural ACE inhibitor, angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitor. It's a really potent, I mean, it's potent at lowering blood pressure. And even some guys that have very low cortisol to begin with, it's actually too potent for them. It can lower cortisol a little bit too far. My blood pressure dropped down quite significantly on Eclonia cava to the point where I actually had to back off. I don't use it as much anymore, but I had to back off because it was so potent at lowering my diastolic and systolic blood pressure.
How many points are we talking? Did it drop you, say, 20 systolic, 10 diastolic, or even more significant than that?
For me, it was 5 to 10 for the systolic, 5 to 10 points, and then about 5 to 8-ish for the diastolic. For me, I'm already like, unfortunately, like a lot of guys would be like, I wouldn't say jealous, but like my baseline blood pressure is so low already to begin with that any further actually makes me feel like weaker and more fatigued.
Wow, that's amazing. I wish, in some regards, I wish I was a little lighter as far as my body weight, because now I'm up to 240 pounds, 109 kilos, and it's not great for blood pressure. I haven't even necessarily tried to get that high as far as the weight, but I've noticed it's an obvious correlation. As your weight goes up, your blood pressure goes up. So perhaps for some of the heavier guys, whether you're on anabolic steroids or testosterone or you're not, this would be a good way to possibly bring down the blood pressure from that, from just being heavy
Yeah,
in general.
yeah, 100%. And then, yeah, for sure. I think the circulation aspect, lowering blood pressure, ACE inhibitor, and then also the circulation part of it, the fact that there was a study where they compared it up against Viagra, and it actually outperformed Viagra in terms of there was like a sexual quality questionnaire thing, and an increasing erection quality, and also orgasm intensity, things like that. So I was like, what's not to like? I mean, I guess the only potential side effect, obviously, the lowering of blood pressure. The other effect, which actually may be beneficial for guys that are on gear, for the guys that have too much iron, hemochromatosis or excess iron, Eclonia cava will help to lower iron levels. It's the fluorotannins that can block iron absorption in the gut. So this could actually be somewhat beneficial, but also harmful for guys that are anemic.
This is pretty interesting stuff, because this is yet another one that you don't hear about, you haven't heard anything about. So I feel like you're bringing kind of the cutting edge uh, new supplementation to the general public, making it known. Do you think melatonin is still a good choice? I feel like from just anecdotal experience, when I take 10 milligrams of melatonin, I definitely feel like I do get somewhat of a deeper sleep. I feel a little more rested when I wake up. And then I've been taught that melatonin has antioxidant principles and is relatively good for you.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up melatonin because I was actually hanging out with Dr. Aloka. He has a PhD in neuroscience and sleep expert, and he was telling me about recently suppository melatonin, um, like
Wow.
using 100 milligrams of suppository melatonin. He said it just completely knocks him out. Um, but as far as melatonin goes, as far as the beneficial effects, if I was ever feeling extremely run down or my immune system was like compromised to a degree, taking melatonin will be highly advantageous. I mean, the benefits as far as an antioxidant, improving overall, metabolic function, it's highly beneficial. If I were to suggest it for the everyday person, I would say there are better options than to be using melatonin. Um, as far as like the dosages go, I'd be looking at, if you're going to be using it sustainably, I actually prefer to use 300 micrograms, which is zero point 0.3 milligrams, um, as a 6 hour extended release, which I think Life Extension, they create a 6 hour timed release, 300 microgram melatonin. And that one there, I find it's just a small enough dosage to get you through. It's not going to knock you out like a 3 to 10 milligram melatonin will. But yeah, that's what I usually recommend.
So why would you stay away from melatonin then long term for the general public?
Um, I guess the number one reason would be the negative effects it may have on mood the following day. Not many people really realize this, but melatonin can actually dampen dopamine signaling. And this is something that I've noticed with clients, and also in general. A lot of people say that they notice they feel like depressed or like flat mood the day after taking melatonin. Um, and it can sort of mess with mood. The other aspect there is the potentially lowering of libido and sex drive, which could also be linked to that. It may be having an effect on, I know it's also used in high doses as an aromatase inhibitor, but not as I don't know if it's in the circulation. I think it's more so in the brain. I'm pretty sure there's some research on melatonin acting as an aromatase inhibitor.
Now, as far as dopamine dampening supplements that maybe people should be aware of, what would you say are some things that are kind of dangerous? As far as I think I've heard ashwagandha can have some issues. Uh, you were talking about some of this stuff the other day as far as supplements that may uh, not be so good as far as your dopamine and serotonin and all that sort of thing. What are some supplements you would say, buy or beware of?
Absolutely, number one is ashwagandha, which is marketed as a testosterone booster and a herb to lower stress. It will do that. It will assist with lowering cortisol, but at the expense of increasing serotonin levels, and also potentially dampening dopamine signaling as well. Another herb that men should be watching out for is it's a nootropic called Bacopa monnieri. It's excellent for improving memory performance and BDNF and increasing growth factors in the brain. However, Bacopa monnieri, I've seen some literature suggesting that it has mild antipsychotic effects. And anytime I read a study that's demonstrating like a herb that has antipsychotic properties or antipsychotic effects, I stay well away from those. I'm just like, I don't want anything blocking my dopamine receptors.
Yeah, and I think our entire society is very dopamine driven. Everything we do, there's always the dopamine stimulus. So you have to be somewhat aware of all of that and cautious to not allow yourself to get where you no longer respond, or
Mm.
you're just constantly seeking out dopamine. This is this is where refraining from watching like pornography and stuff like that can help, or eating certain foods, dietary. There's many different ways where you can kind of make yourself more sensitive again to that dopamine response without constantly being bombarding the receptors, which is what our society literally is. Our society nowadays is entirely driven around, let's completely overwhelm the dopamine receptors at all times to sell things and make money and all that sort of thing. That's what they do. So that's a whole
Yeah.
nother tangent, but um, yeah, I've definitely noticed that. Now, what would you say, how big of a role does diet play in, how important is it, truthfully? Uh, I've checked the labs at various times where I've eaten better, and then other times where I'm eating more lenient. And I haven't noticed huge changes on the lab work, albeit I'm 31 years old. But how big of a role do processed foods and sugar and all that sort of thing actually play in hormone function, say testosterone levels, and overall health?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, what you're referring to there is like, how much of an impact is nutrition going to really have on testosterone production? I mean, if you're looking at, I mean, I've worked and seen a guy that was like vegan, for example. I mean, I don't think much of your audience is going to be vegan, but there was a guy that was, vegan, very low fat diet, like deliberately very low fat. We're talking less than like 25 grams of fats per day, which is super low. Um, and he was smashing about 900 to 1,000 grams of carbs a day. He was a cyclist, by the way, so not cycling gear, but he was cycling on a bike. Um, and his testosterone dropped down to hypergonadal. So he was at, I think it was 160 or so. And just by implementing then, just by adding in about 30 grams of fats coming from macadamia nuts, olive oil, um, and I think it was like almonds, and I think a little bit of coconut oil. Like just by increasing fat intake in that scenario, that increases testosterone significantly. Like by I think it was like 200 or 300 points just by increasing the fat intake. I think the most important principle for guys to understand is you're in a much better position if you're in a caloric surplus versus being in a caloric deficit. Being in a caloric deficit, it's a good way to rob your body of testosterone. Like, the body just will struggle to prioritize testosterone when it's in a caloric deficit. And as far as like what I would consider like the optimal macronutrient split, you guys talk about macronutrients all the time. I'm sure you've manipulated yours like heaps over the years with different protocols. Like I would say realistically, we're looking at about, it doesn't have to be complicated. I'd say 40% of your macros coming from protein, 30% from carbohydrates, and 30% from fats. Like just a very even balance, but selecting good quality fats, good quality protein, and just avoiding vegetable oils, corn oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, canola oil, rapeseed oil. Like these oils they are problematic, and they should be avoided.
See, that's really interesting. I'm big into eggs, whole eggs, and then ground beef. Those are my go-to fat sources. Eat plenty of them every day. But the vegetable oil thing is something that Paul Saladino has made very popular in recent years, and he's been big on that as far as that being the root driver of all sorts of issues as far as cardiovascular diseases and such. Um, do you feel the vegetable oils just wreak havoc on testosterone levels, or is it just a general health standpoint, from a general health standpoint, that you see these as problematic? Because over here in America, uh, they're in everything. And like I don't eat the cleanest. I'm not. I like to indulge in some things that I shouldn't, and all of these things. Any processed food in America has some form of vegetable oil. Every single one, uh, if it's not a natural product. So, is this something I should really try to buckle down on more, and that would improve my health and my testosterone and all that sort of thing?
Well, yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I think the major reason why most people should be avoiding the vegetable oils is because of the negative effects on metabolic health, insulin sensitivity, and also the fact that a lot of these vegetable oils are obesogenic. They're designed to actually just like they're actually not beneficial for metabolism in general. The way I look at it is like, yeah, you want to be incorporating foods that are pro-metabolic, just like what you mentioned, beef, eggs, things that are highly nutrient dense, things that actually stimulate thyroid production. I mean, we haven't had enough time to even talk about thyroid function, but that I think is actually incredibly important. Yeah.
Well, that's actually very interesting because I have something in regards to thyroid production. This is a very interesting subject for me because it runs in my family. Hypothyroidism does. My sister has a higher amount of hypothyroidism. I have a small degree. My TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, would typically be around anywhere from the 3.0 range upwards of 4.5. That was my baseline. It was always in that area, pre-anabolic steroids, during anabolic steroids, after. It's always been in that range. And long story short, I did a little experiment where I ran high dose iodine for a year. I don't know if you agree with this or not, but this is something I tried out where I did 7.5 milligrams, I believe, of potassium iodide and 5 milligrams of iodine. And I took this every day for a year. During that time, towards the end, I got my TSH checked. It was 9.5. 9.5 being somewhat of a false reading because it shows up as it shows up with a high reading basically on the blood work on the blood test. So then I came off it after a year of doing this every single day. My TSH lowest it's ever been 2.0. Never come close to that ever. In 30 years, I've never come close to a 2.0 TSH. And this was after the 1 year high iodine intake, which I found fascinating.
This is super interesting because I mean I've spoken quite a lot about like megadosing iodine. What I think might have happened in your case, Pete, is like um, so the initial period when it spiked up, you said it did it go how high did you say? 9?
9.5.
Man. So what this is the classic scenario of what happens when you megadose iodine, it can actually temporarily distort and disrupt thyroid function. It actually, when we're talking big doses, like you said, you were using pretty high doses. Is that 5 milligrams? You say?
Yes, it comes in a 12.5 milligram tablet. It's like I don't know how to say it exactly. I order all or something like that.
Yeah.
And I believe the breakdown was 5 milligrams of iodine straight up, and then 7.5 milligrams of potassium iodide. If you can find it on Amazon, that was the breakdown. I used that, which a typical, if you look up an iodine supplement, the dose is, I
Yeah.
mean, 10 to 15 times lower than that to kind of put this into perspective.
Yeah, that's a huge dose. But then the fact that you said your TSH then after 1 year of stopping, it went down to 2 roughly. To me, that sounds like so what happened is he spiked his iodine levels in the blood, which would have spiked the TSH. And then 1 year later, when your iodine levels eventually like balanced out, what I think is that's when your TSH actually went in a somewhat healthy range, which is, it's a decent range, like 2. I've got my own preference. I like to be anywhere from 0.75 to about, or even, yeah, 0.75 to about 1.5. Um, but I mean, I'd be happy to help you get there. I mean, I don't know if you've tried some other ways or other tactics to lower the TSH further.
No, that's what I realized. Like 1.5 is what I've always thought of as more ideal. But even for me to go from this 3.5 range typically to 4 down to 2 was remarkable because I've never been that low ever before. So Obviously, guys, the lower your TSH level, the more optimally your thyroid is performing. So this is one blood test where you actually want the TSH to be on the lower side. Um, and that's the whole breakdown there. But what recommendations, I mean, what would you do in that case if you were trying to even take it down a little further?
So first of all, I would be implementing. Have you heard of the herb Coleus forskolin?
No.
All right, so I'll send you a link after on WhatsApp. So Coleus Force, I'll outline a protocol for you, man. Like I'm happy to develop you a stack for that. It'd be Coleus Forskolin. I'd be taking in about 5 to 6 Brazil nuts per day. I'd be adding in like different. There's even Tudka. I don't know if you've been taking the liver protective supplement Tudka at all.
I have in the past, but having been off the anabolic steroids for a while, I just didn't see. I know it's a tremendous supplement. I understand it's one of the best supplements out there from an all-around health perspective, but I just cut it out when, the liver enzymes don't get taxed that high. And I know it does a lot more than that. That's really boxing it into a very simplistic view. But the main reason people take it is when they're on oral steroids or whatever in my line of work. To bring down the liver enzymes. So I kind of let
Yeah.
that fall off, but it's got so many more benefits beyond just protecting the liver. So
Yeah, 100%. I'd say like 500 to 1,000 milligrams of Tudka. When you get on the taurine, I'd assume I would expect the taurine to have a positive effect there as well because it's so pro-metabolic. There is some research in rat studies suggesting that it can accelerate the conversion of T4 to T3 by increasing liver glycogen storage. And then there's a few other herbs. Oh, cordyceps mushroom. That's the other one. I've had a number of guys that have been taking cordyceps and they've had ridiculously low TSH values. So have you ever used like a high potency cordyceps mushroom extract?
no, to be honest, a lot of these supplements today I've never heard of because they're not talked about in the mainstream. This is all brand new stuff. So that's another one. I have no idea.
Yeah, that's all right. Well, yeah, I'll shoot you after the podcast, man. I'll shoot over like a protocol. Maybe you can post it and share it or something. Yeah, happy to help.
Yeah, that sounds good because what are the main, I mean, why would you say it's important to have a healthy thyroid? What are the main drivers of that?
Well, I mean, thyroid health is at the root of, I mean, I guess like it's the metabolic master switch. It's the metabolic spark plug. If your thyroid is not optimal, you're not going to be in good health. Your cholesterol will start to increase. Your blood sugar control will get dysregulated. Your sex hormone production will get destroyed. Your ability to burn fat will be hindered. You can't burn fat when you're hypothyroid. Yeah, it's definitely, and also body temperature as well. So something really important if people struggle or they can't actually get their thyroid hormones checked, taking your core body temperature as soon as you wake up, first thing in the morning, is a really good proxy, a really good measure of your metabolic rate as well.
That's really interesting because one of the things I did deal with for a very long time was I would, frequently be cold, just a general body temperature, and that kind of ties into the higher TSH level. So that's another thing that's pretty cool here. Now, we'll wrap up here pretty soon, but if one thing I want to touch on is do you see a detrimental effect in natural testosterone levels if one were to overtrain? Is there a thing as too much strain as far as lowering the testosterone levels themselves as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a degree of training stimulus that's actually beneficial versus when you over push the body, particularly as a natty. I mean, training twice a day is off the cards as a natty completely. You just can't train twice a day super intensely. I think realistically, like 5 days a week of very intense training, couple of days off, and then taking like doing 10 to 15,000 steps a day, roughly. is a good practice, good protocol. Well, at least that's what I was when I was trying to optimize my testosterone. That's exactly what I was doing. I was doing 5 very intense work, like weightlifting sessions, or like bodybuilding styled workouts, squatting, training legs twice a week. And then I was also doing sprint training as well. I do think sprint work, like very, very high intensity efforts, not long duration aerobic training. I mean, like very high intensity, short duration activities. Like these are also really beneficial for testosterone production as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you would say that hard training actually helps optimize testosterone as opposed to bring it down.
Yeah, if they're sleeping sufficiently and they're eating well, I mean, I don't, and their thyroid hormones and all the other things, they're not nutrient deficient. Like I think a man between the ages of 20 to 35, for example, should be able to train 4 to 5 times a week very intensely and not feel completely destroyed from that.
Makes sense. And then one last question I want to finish up with. If we had to pick, what would you say is your number one supplement in regards to anything? I know that's kind of hard to dial down, but what would you say is the number one supplement if you could only take one supplement that you would take?
It's going to be the one that I take every single day, and that's taurine. I take taurine like religiously, like daily, because I know it's just ticking off all the boxes. Like it protects my liver, protects the kidneys. It has an anti-anxiety effect for me. That's because of its GABA effect. So like socially, I feel more confident, like just calmer, less like frazzled sort of thing. But yeah, taurine would be my go-to.
Interesting. So far, I don't have the, extensive experience you do, but I'd go with creatine just from the strength standpoint. Just tremendous strength gains compared to being off it. It's very noticeable. I've had a lot of good experience with that, and also try out the new form of creatine, which
Yeah.
I'll link up for you guys. But no, Lucas, thanks for being on. Where can people find you? I'm going to link all your stuff in the description below and in the comments. But
Yeah, if they search Boost Your Biology on YouTube, just go and subscribe and support my channel. I'm trying to grow that channel as much as possible. Really want to like I've just got so many great topic ideas, so many good video ideas, different stacks, different protocols that I just want to get out there, just want to share to the world. So Boost Your Biology on YouTube. And also if they want to check out my website, ergogenic.health, they can check that out as well.
yeah, I'd say you have vast experience with this, a lot of knowledge, a lot to be taught. I hadn't heard of a lot of this, so you're like the natural supplement guru, I feel like, really. So yeah, thanks for coming on, man. I will we'll definitely do it again. It was a pleasure.